Welcome to This Explainer. Let's just jump right in. Today, I'm going to act as your cosmic witness as we explore the dark, honestly kind of theatrical architecture of the human psyche. You can completely forget the pitchforks and glowing red eyes. We're actually going to look at how legendary tales of temptation aren't really about literal monsters at all. Instead, they act as this incredible internal psychological mirror for our own hidden desires.
So, what if the ultimate evil didn't wear horns, but, well, a tailored red suit? Let's step into a concept our sources call the village of the ever-watchful. Picture a society that spent generations barring its gates against these imaginary monsters of fire and brimstone, but then a profoundly unsettling guest arrives. And he doesn't roar, he certainly doesn't shake the earth. Because honestly, a finely tailored suit is way more effective at ruining lives than horns and a pitchfork could ever be.
Act 1, The Ordinary Face of Evil. Our story really kicks off with this realization. The most dangerous threats rarely roar. They whisper. It's absolutely crucial to think about this contrast. When we imagine traditional demons, we picture grotesque creatures, jagged teeth, giant wings, the whole shebang. But then we have the 1895 painting of Mephistopheles by the German artist Eduard von Grützner. Grützner totally flips the script. He completely humanizes the mythical monster. What we get is a disturbingly ordinary, elderly man in this really elegant red suit. No fire, no claws, just a face you could literally pass on the street and not look twice at.
And that's exactly the point. Because he looked like a friendly neighbor, the villagers would just pass him in the square with a nod. They were completely unaware that this living mask was a total master of rationality and seduction, not violence. Evil actually dismantles our vigilance through the seductive camouflage of familiarity. It's like he doesn't attack you. He just presents a completely reasonable option, steps back, and lets you decide.
Act 2, The Classic Faustian Bargain. It's so fascinating to trace how this classic bargain evolved over time. It starts way back in the late 16th century as just the simple, straightforward trade for sensory indulgence. Then, in 1592, Christopher Marlowe steps in and makes the scholar a deeply tragic figure, totally torn apart by guilt. Fast forward to 1808, and Goethe elevates the whole bargain into a modern man's search for life's true meaning. And finally, by 1890, we see how this psychological dynamic perfectly mirrors the tragic arc of Dorian Gray. Just like Faust, Dorian trades his soul for eternal youth and unchecked ambition, right? Only to find his inner world growing completely, terrifyingly hollow. Okay, welcome to the parable of the frozen throne. Imagine a brilliant scholar. He's weary of the slow progress of human discovery, so he retreats to a study. In psychological terms, he is the ego, that fragile mediator just trying to seek out more. Then, the crimson guest steps out of the shadows, acting as the id. He's that dark mirror whispering, "Hey, I serve only what you want," offering totally unchecked ambition. And together, they just bypass the superego entirely. They skip right over the books, the rigid public duty, the suffocating moral restraint. This tempter is really just a psychological mirror reflecting the scholar's own vanity. So what actually happens? The scholar becomes the Crimson King. Sure, he achieves godlike power, but he ends up a prisoner of his own rebellion. By choosing to rule in a moral void instead of serving the light, he discovers that shortcutting the moral journey just leaves you with this terrifying emptiness. His throne is literally built in the coldest, most isolated cavern of his soul. Act 3, The Sad Clown Paradox. It's fascinating to compare the Crimson Guest with another iconic figure, the Sad Jester, and how they use the color red for entirely opposite reasons. The Crimson Guest wears red to represent the blinding flame of raw desire. He unmasks the hidden corruption in others by offering these tempting, super reasonable contracts. But then you have the Sad Jester, like the famous figure of Stanchik. He wears red too, but for him it represents the blood of an internal wound. He masks his profound internal despair just to perform manufactured joy for society. They are essentially two sides of a coin, reflecting a society that vastly prefers comfortable lies over hard truths. And this right here is the sad clown paradox. The jester is forced into this brutal emotional self-sacrifice. He has to drown in his own solitary melancholy, feeling incredibly disconnected, essentially turning his back on the decadent party he's forced to entertain. It's such a stark portrait of a society demanding a performer to be this bright beacon of joy, all while completely ignoring the individual's silent, gray despair. Act 4, Theatrical Symbols of Manipulation. Let's step back into the flickering theater of the mind for a second, because we really need to decode the visual traps set by our demonic guest in Grützner's artwork. First, his elegant red tunic. It symbolizes the blinding flame of raw desire rather than anything violent. Then, check out that exaggerated feather. That is a courtly, highly theatrical accessory. It proves he's playing a manipulative role. He's not a natural threat. And notice his forward posture. He's physically acting as an uneasy visual bridge between you, the viewer, and your own internal abyss. Finally, that subtle curve of his lip. He isn't attacking, he's just smiling softly, planting a little seed of doubt and patiently waiting for you to make the wrong decision. This brings us to the core illusion of it all. We spend generations watching the woods for the external beast, the fantastical monsters we build giant walls to keep out. But in doing so, we entirely miss the internal mirror. We completely miss the charming, truth-telling demon who simply walks right up and opens the gates we had already left unlatched in our own minds. Epilogue: Mirrors of Internal Despair. As the red curtains begin to fall on our explainer today, we really have to turn the gaze back upon ourselves. The sources make this abundantly clear. The horned beasts, the shadowy demons, they are merely ghosts of our own making. They're tragic vessels created by society, so we simply don't have to face our own internal anxieties and collective greed. The ultimate horror wasn't found in the shadows of the woods, but in the terrifying realization that the guest looked exactly like us. So, I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If the ultimate evil is merely a reflection of your own dissatisfied ambitions, a charming guest offering you a shortcut past your own moral journey, what actually reflects back when you look in the glass? In the silence of your own study, what compromises are you willing to make from within? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning what you see in the mirror.